Carlos Roberto de Oliveira is a physician with a specialization in anesthesiology and post-graduation in occupational medicine and acupuncture. He is also an advisor to the Paraíba College of Physicians, founder and current president of the Campina Grande Spiritist Medical Society, and works as a volunteer at the União Fraternal Espírita. He has been a guest speaker at both the Brazilian and International Spiritist Medical Associations. Please welcome Dr. Carlos Roberto de Oliveira.
Bom dia a todos. Inicialmente, eu peço desculpas.
I'd like to first ask for your pardon for my speaking Portuguese. I'd like to thank Sonia Doi and Dr. Marlene Nobre for the invitation that they gave me, for the opportunity for us to work once again at this event, a medical spiritist event, and to meet colleagues and friends again, that we have the great satisfaction of living together and being able to work together. This makes us very happy. Our proposal for work is based on trying to show the points of connection between the mind and material at a greater level of approach, the inside of the cell. For this reason, we're going to use concepts that have been placed before you today by the two people who spoke before me, principally by Dr. Mario, talking about the connection of the mind and the brain, and then the concepts brought up by Jean Carlos about the revelations of the pineal gland. We're going to try initially to answer a question. I can't change the slide. Button in the middle? Okay. What is the real relationship between the mind and the brain? We saw in the initial ideas that the Okay, we got there. To answer this question is basic. We saw in the first ideas brought up that the main function that exists between the brain, the main relationship between the brain and the mind, is a relationship of mediator. That is, the brain does not produce, but processes. It brings events from our mind, brings them out. And this information goes into tune with the relationships that have been given by the spirit mentioned in the greater book called The Greater World, when it was affirmed that the brain is the instrument that translates the mind or our thoughts, as has been shown in the book The Greater World. In this way, how is it that the brain works to translate this function? In this video, we observe that our brain has its principal cells, which are the neurons. They work with electromagnetic pulses and the release of neurochemical substances, what are the transmitters. Through this dance of electromagnetic charges, there's the flow of substances that open up the potential for action and propagation of the wave, which is electromagnetic, and as it gets to the termination, the synapses, they release these substances, neuropeptides that have been mentioned before, that then open up the propagation to the next neuron. This is the basic mechanism of development of the brain. What is the structure that we are going to place in our brain to carry out its main function as a mediator? Here we have the pineal gland. The concepts have been presented already by Jean Carlos, and let's analyze its activity through levels of melatonin, its main hormone that's secreted. Melatonin has a strict relationship with the control of biological cycles of our organism. As you can see here, it is secreted. It goes into the bloodstream, but only through the direct interference of light, promoting inhibition of its secretion. In this other image, we can see that its levels go up when it gets dark, reaching the greatest peak around midnight. After it goes down, for the next day, under the influence of light, it goes back to the basic levels. Why is it important to analyze the function of these levels of this hormone melatonin? Because in an indirect way, it reflects activities of the pineal gland. This is shown in this work, which has already been cited, where a correlation was examined between the function of the pineal gland with religious meditation. This work showed an increase in the production of melatonin, confirming an intense activity of the pineal gland, defining how there is an important role in intrinsic conscience in these feelings of religiosity and relaxation that we experience, regardless of our religious preference. It's an evidence, such as Descartes has told us, of a connection, strong indication between the physical body and our soul. Here, images show that after meditation, some things are still left in activity. Here, the pineal gland, and 8 minutes still after the end of meditation, the pineal gland continued in activity. And this demonstrates the long-lasting effect that these experiments determine in our brain activity. Once the meditation is ended, the gland continued active, exteriorating its influences on the entire organism. Within the numerous functions that have been spoken of about the pineal gland that are contained in the book Missionaries of Light, we emphasize for our hypothesis of work this says control of the subconscious forces under the direct command of our will, thanks to its connection with the mind through the control of our will, thanks to the connections that they have with our mind, showing the electromagnetic principles in the vital field. In this way, they serve to translate the spirit in a two-way road. That is, the spirit of our soul, or of our consciousness, as we want to call it, to the physical body, as well as the fruit of our experiences, of our choices, of our attitudes, which will be introduced, or they will be absorbed by our spirit, where they will remain filed away as part of our immortal patrimony of our own evolution, the result of acquisition of our experiences. Dr. Mario mentioned also about the mechanism of sacral neural translation, Perhaps this is the best hypothesis to explain how psychic events are translated into physical effects. And this has been well explained by him, principally determining this psychosomatic network, which has become exteriorized through psychoneuroimmunologia, an entire integration of community of the mind with our body. This was mentioned yesterday and today, this mechanism of connection, the receptors that are in our cells, and the neuropeptides, hormones that are the ligands. The psychosomatic network functions in the union of these two structures, which occur simultaneously, as was mentioned by the doctor yesterday. These receptors are found in the membrane of our cells. They have a function of capturing any kind of formation or sign that comes from the exterior area. And as it captures this information and transfers them into the interior of the cells. Information are transmitted by these ligands through a vibration, attractive vibration, which represents 98% of the communication of the transfer of information in our body. The other 2% are restricted to the synapses of our brain. Therefore, the conclusion of this whole idea is that our emotions, which represent and determine the vibrational attraction, will make the neuropeptides are connected to receptors, and this connection is transformed into the real experience of our feelings. Neuroplasticity has an important role in the operation of these mechanisms. Dr. Jeff Schwartz says that our mental activity, commanded by the will, can alter the cerebral function in a clear and systematic way. This is made very clear when Dr. Mario said or talked about the synthesis of serotonin, very well explained in those regions where our brain is able to make a change, a selective change in the production of the neuropeptide that's related to the feeling of good, of comfort, altering only the state of sadness or happiness. This is work done with subjects in which this change is recommended of mental state. And what it also calls our attention is that during the experience of sadness, the cortex, the left was mentioned, and happiness showed the change to the right cortex. Dr. Mario concluded in this work that a specific emotional state that is voluntarily self-induced can rapidly be translated into a selective modification of the ability to regulate the synthesis of serotonin. In this work, we have the showing of intentions, desires, emotional expressions, promoting alterations of our brain. That is, a translation, psychoneuropsychological translation, which is shown and very specific. So, going a little deeper in our investigation, we're going to observe here that the pineal gland and the melatonin hormone, which is its main activity, is going to show intimate connections and interferences with a number of different structures that are microscopic at the molecular level in the entirety of our brain, especially the relationship between the microtubules, of which we're going to talk about a little bit in greater detail. Its primary contribution, alpha-tubulina and beta-tubulina, and this other protein, acamolodina, which is a protein that regulates the intracellular relationships, that shows a direct relationship in the levels of melatonin as well as in the determination of the microtubules. Let's see. Here we have this tube showing that the microtubes are not static in our organization. They're always growing in polymerization or in retraction, in depolymerization, as we can see in this video, where it shows all of
microtubules created by the lateral association of protofilaments formed by the polymerization of tubulin dimers. While the plus ends of some microtubules extend toward the plasma membrane, proteins stabilize the curved conformation of protofilaments from other microtubules, causing their rapid plus end depolymerization. Microtubules provide tracks along which membrane-bound vesicles travel to and from the plasma membrane.
Transportando
The direction of movement of these cargo vesicles is due to a family of motor proteins linking vesicles and microtubules. Membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria are loosely trapped by the
conectado com todas
cytoskeleton.
as organelas
Connected with all these
Boundaries
organelles.
change shape
principalmente com a
continuously,
mitocôndria,
and their orientation is partly dictated by their interaction with microtubules. All the
e uma
microtubules
conexão
originate from the
importantíssima com seu
centrosome,
tríolo.
a discrete fibrous
Nós
structure
veremos
containing
Sorry, I
detalhes
can't translate what the video is
em
on.
seguida.
and located near the cell nucleus.
Esse trabalho
This work,
apresentado
shown by
por Delgadillo
Delgadillo,
mostra que
shows
os
that
níveis
the levels
de melatonina,
of
eles
melatonin,
sofrem interferência
they suffer
com a
interference
acamolodina
with
como
acamolodina.
em concentrações
In
fisiológicas,
physiological
esse hormônio
concentrations, this
produzido pelo
hormone
glândula
produced by the pineal
ele
gland
vai inibir
is going to
aquela outra
inhibit
proteína
that other
reguladora do
protein
cálcio,
that
e com
regulates
isso
calcium.
permite
In this way, it permits the occurrence of an increase
daquela rede
of that
microtubular
microtubule
das nossas
network
células.
within our cells.
Os microtúbulos
The
em
microtubules in
atividade,
activity,
eles expressam
they
funções
express
diretamente
functions directly
relacionadas,
related,
principalmente com os
especially
processos
with
cognitivos.
the co-limited processes.
Ele constitui
It
toda uma
constitutes
rede
an
integrada
entire integrated
de
network
sinalização,
of signalization, permitting communications
tanto dentro da
both
célula,
within the cell
como também
as
de
also
célula para
between the
célula.
cells.
Daí ele se
Therefore,
transforma
it is transformed
candidato
into a
natural
natural
para
candidate
transmitir
for
os
transmission of signals.
É uma estrutura
It's a unidimensional structure, branched off. It's present in practically all of the cells, with connection to all of the organelles, from the nucleus up to the cytoplasmatic membrane. And it transforms into a means of transmission of signals of physical forces, carrying out integrated functions and without interruption. The microtubules also are responsible for the constitution and formation of neural networks and release of the neurotransmitters, as we saw in that first video, which shows the functioning of our brain. However, a very interesting evidence to understand how this process of integration occurs. Here, the neural networks are coupled with the neuronal microtubule network within the neuron. If you observe this image, we have a neuron making a synapse or a connection with the pedrito, which is another part of the neuron. And this connection occurs directly with this network of microtubules, neuronal microtubules. That is a structure which is still deeper and smaller that exists within the neuron. And this microtubule network is going to adapt itself to the demands of the neuroplasticity of the brain, as was also shown here by Dr. Mario. How is it that this neuronal network is adapted at the molecular level to all of the demands that come and determined by our attitudes, our mental positions, our thoughts, by our feelings, or by the connections of the peptide neurons, altering the processing of signals throughout this entire network. Therefore, signaling goes together. Whenever there occurs a change of signal, an alteration of signal, there occurs a change also in the form. In what way do these alterations occur? This process is adaptive, which we know as neuroplasticity, utilizes three basic means, which is dynamics of growth, those microtubules of the process that we saw in the video, growing, propagation of signals throughout this network, and their adaptive auto-stabilization. It takes advantage of the propagation of signals and its own growth, the structure of growth, in a relationship of partnership where the electromagnetic wave longitudinal is being propagated, and the microtubules are adapting in a specific way, having as mediators the proteins. And then we go on to recognize the function, and it's very important, of the diverse proteins that they carry out, principally in their spatial conformation and in the determination of their function. However, this conformation, I repeat, is determined by the change of signals that occurs between its constitutive elements, its electrons. We observe once again the microtubule, the empty structure and its elements, and the wave goes propagating along the microtubule, determining the polymerization and depolymerization and microtubular activity. I mentioned that microtubules were quite closely related to cognitive activities. Alzheimer's disease, for example, we find here in the normal neuron where this microtubule network is complete, carrying out its regular functions. In the neuron that's been compromised, there's a destruction of this network. This video, once again, shows the inside of the neuron and the microtubule network. Here we have these proteins which give stability to these microtubules so that they can carry out the normal function of transmitting signals and all of the multiple functions that they have, which are attributed to the microtubules. When this network is destabilized, there's a accumulation of fibers, which is one of the functions that occurs along with the amyloid places, indicates death of the neuron. Also, there's a straight relationship that is found during the act of general anesthesia. This computational analysis made with anesthesiologists shows that the microtubule has more than 32 connections of connection with the ambulatory anesthesia, and once the anesthetic is connected to this, it promotes a disconnection. It prevents the synapses to occur, and therefore it blocks reversibly consciousness. We know that another mechanism of action of anesthesia in general involves the blocking of the receptors on the plasmatic membrane. But this idea has been forgotten, but it was cited initially by the father of physiology, where he suggested that in the interior of the microtubules there exist mechanisms which function to block or deactivate the experience of consciousness. This work analyzed the implications of the effects of general anesthesia, and also it's related to the cognitive dysfunctions. There are attempts to show the intimate relationship between the functioning of the microtubules with the cognitive processes. I said that where there was signalization, changes of signaling, there would also occur changes in form. This is evidence, and this work shows that only the movement of a single electron in the peripheral layers of the atoms that constitute a protein can promote an alteration in their conformations, both for front as well as back of the tubular molecule. One electron alone can be modified, because this change is going to absorb directly that energy of the passage wave, which goes through in a longitudinal way throughout the entire inside of the microtubules. And it's important to consider that this mechanism depends on the tunneling, the quantic tunneling of electrons, where they remain changing from a protein to alpha to beta in the tubulin, promoting currents. And these electromagnetic currents are present in the interior of the proteins, even at a long distance. In this way, the mechanism of quantic tunneling permits us to understand how certain information can be transferred from one media to another without it being necessary, as classical physics determines, having to overcome these obstacles. This image shows the possibility that information that comes on this side, as it finds a barrier, can simply be reproduced on the other side using mechanisms of interference. The mechanism of tunneling can be very well seen in this video. Here we have an electron that was at a peripheral layer. It's a possibility of present. It was energized to a more peripheral layer, except that it doesn't go through this space. It travels into a fourth dimension as if it were going through a tunnel. And it reappears at a higher level, and when it comes back, it releases the energy that was managed. This mechanism is involved in the tunneling of the the proteins as was shown, and at long distance it permits perhaps for us to understand how a electromagnetic wave can cover distances and to find through the principles of symphony and affinity, and therefore establish an effect that we want to have in our basic source of thought. In other words, to explain how it is that a prayer, for example, can help some people regardless of the distance of the space. We have already seen that the molecular movements of life can only be explained and understood by quantum physics or by the principles of quantum physics. Henry Stapp, a theoretical physicist, sets in this phrase an idea that we can understand that quantum mechanics allow us, through our own mental effort, through our attitude, we can control the natural forces of existence. Through how the intentions we can influence brain processes. This thought is the complement of Jean-Carl spoke already of the main idea that was presented by the first speaker in this first lecture by Mario. But we find here the elements to consider the intention. There only exists intention of the human being through a deliberated will, for choice, for a certain determination. These are the conscious actions that are going to promote the changes necessary in each one of us. Because of course we know that actions of the mind over the body occurs throughout processes that are also subconscious. But the subconscious processes occurring through automatic processes, where we establish for ourselves what kind of automaticity do we carry through the choices and the attitudes that we adopt in life. If we seek to renew our own existence, we do need have our desire of our intention determined to noble and edifying objectives, and therefore to promote the necessary brain alterations. This idea proposed by Hameroff and by Terhoz of the integration of the experience of consciousness, answered by some and accepted by others, but not totally discarded. They suggest that there are those quantum processes in the interior of the proteins of the microtubules that are going to change form and in turn can change the behavior of neurons, and which is the change of the charge and form of the protein, the change in the form of the protein that is transformed into the point of amplification. This point of amplification that exists between the quantum world and our classic world, that is, between that other reality and our objective reality. And this point of amplification will determine what we do in good or better in life. It's interesting for us to consider this idea because this thought was also proposed by the Spirit André Luiz that has already been cited in his work in the book Evolution in Two Worlds, where he traces an evolutionary trajectory of the spirit on the two sides of existence. And he suggests that through the cellular center that occurs a junction, the union of the physical forces with the spiritual forces. We could very well think about quantum forces as material forces. And it is this point also that in the theory of Penrose and Hameroff suggests the point of amplification, which André Luiz says that occurs the mental impulse of an electromagnetic nature, which is going to direct the movement of the chromosomes, the equator of the central region to the poles, opening up the entire cellular function. And this we can see clearly in this new video. Observe that the genetic material which is dispersed inside the cell in the nucleus is lined up, forming the chromosomes during the initial phase of mitosis. Then occurs the duplication of the centrals, and they begin to immigrate from the area of the equator to the poles. These microluminous filaments are made up of microtubules, obeying that mechanism of growth or polymerization, and also detraction or depolymerization. As they join the centrometers, it promotes the separation of the chromosomes that have already been duplicated, and therefore it commands all of this process of cellular division. All of this process of growth and attraction of the microtubules has been opened up, involving alterations of its signals, of its charges, changing the form and determining the result. Therefore, we find the strict analogy of these new evidences showing that the Spirit André Luiz put in his book. Observe the innumerable forms that a protein can take. And as a protein considered as a chemical structure of life, it receives only from our genetic order, from our DNA, from the nucleus, it receives only the sequence of amino acids, which are these little letters here that constitute a protein, but not in its form. The form of the protein, the positioning of the amino acids throughout the polypeptide chain are going to determine the function. It's not the gene, it's not the DNA. This has been made very clear by epigenetics, besides other factors such as the style of life and atmosphere and style of life. And here it's important for us to consider that the protein structure is determined by the number of doubles and forms that the protein assumes, and not directly by the gene. This new video shows a production series of proteins. Just see how many different forms they assume. The factors that determine this doubling, these redundancies don't come from the DNA code. They come from the pulse, electromagnetic pulse, that occurs in the interior of those proteins. Work shows that the protein can take more than 400,000 different formats, and therefore can create n possibilities of functions so that our organism can work with propriety. The proteins are present in all of our structures of the cells. But we identify the most important ones here in its membrane, which form the receptors that we've mentioned at the beginning of that psychosomatic network, because a receptor is a form of a protein or formed by the junction of several proteins. The receptors, we've already said, they capture the neuropeptides that couple with as a key mechanism of a lock. That is the neuropeptide, the specific one in the specific receptor. But then we could ask, what determines, what leads to that neuropeptide to seek out that receptor? It's vibrational attraction that exists between the two. The receptor vibrates at a specific frequency, and that vibration captures the vibration of the neuropeptide. And when they come together, they have the experience of feelings and consciousness. Once these proteins capture, they can function perfectly as if it were the consciousness. Consciousness of the cell is not in the nucleus, as some people believe, as was said before. Works have shown that you can remove the nucleus from a cell and maintain that cell in an isotonic way, changing solutions for a number of different days or even months, and the cell will continue carrying out its regular basic functions. Now, if the cellular membrane, this peripheral part, if this breaks or loses its specific function, then the cell dies. And all of the information that are captured by the receptors are transmitted to the interior of the cell so that it can carry out its regular action. Now, these receptors, as we said, represent a quantum function. They're not static. They're in a continuous process of modification. And just as they capture the neuropeptides, they can also capture energy, light, sound, or any other kind of radio or vibratory frequency. That is, they suffer interference from electromagnetic fields. And this interference is going to promote what? Changes in the balance of its electromagnetic charges. As a consequence, altering the conformation of the protein and, in turn, its function. That is, it's the way for us to understand how a subjective reality can promote effects, actions, or modifications in an objective reality. The Spirit, André Luiz, affirms also in his work, Mechanisms of Mediumship, that our brain, with all of those special cells that are constituted, as we saw at the beginning, they produce mental matter. They function as a microscopic generating plant, a real laboratory. And they're going to exteriorize, producing this mental matter under the impulse of the Spirit. It's not the cell by itself that's producing this mental matter. This is what the materialistic version of materialism would say. But we know through these revelations and the work that has already been shown and presented here that consciousness is extracellular. And it's under the impulse and the command of this conscience or the Spirit that the special cells of our brain produce mental matter. Mental matter is a thought. of the human being. It's made up of chemical elements which are outside hydrogen or uranium, has been shown already, constituting a periodical table of elements that are still unknown to us. And this mental matter is propagated. It's expressed throughout the individual, reaching unimaginable distances. Mental matter acquires the form that our feelings determine. But our will is what gives it direction and impulse. For this reason, feelings and thoughts go hand in hand, because thought exists as a manifestation of our feelings. It's the brain and heart, thought and feeling, walking together, favoring the being to build its own evolutionary journey. And this mental wave is going to be propagating as a wave. Upon being produced, it expresses and exteriorizes from our brains. It gains the infinite in its propagation. André Luiz says that of mental matter of all created beings, we study thought or the energetic flow of the spiritual field. That is, each one of us shows a flow of energetic field that's produced by the exteriorization of our own thoughts, which is manifested in the form of waves that he calls mental electromagnetic waves. They're different from the electromagnetic waves of tradition. Why? Because they conduct the mental states of the individual. They are essentially produced by our mental states. Therefore, they are mental electrical magnetic waves, which in angelic legions are going to be expressed as ultra super short waves. That is, frequencies that are extremely high, that go way beyond the electromagnetic spectrum that we know. As you can see, the gamma rays that have the capacity to penetrate is tremendous. Humanity, commonly, in the human mind, they're expressed in short, medium, or long waves. And in animals, they appear as fragmentary waves. That is, if we observe in detail these vibratory frequencies that make up our thoughts of created spirits, we're going to observe a scaling in which the fragmentary waves of animals or inferior beings evolve to the continuous waves in the human species, so that in the future they can acquire super ultra short rays. As we beings go through evolution and we conquer spiritual conditions that are necessary for us to enter into higher levels. Each spirit, says André Luiz, emits a vibratory power of its own. Exteriorizes mental resources according to the type of wave or energy flow that defines its personality. We have an vibratory identification. It's personal because each mind is its own field where we exteriorize the mental flow as a result of our acquisitions. André Luiz says, the acquisition of our personality is proportional to the moral size that we acquire in love and wisdom that each one accumulates within himself. This revelation, people, is very important for us. Why? Because it places in our hands the force, the energy, the responsibility to direct our own evolution. It's what we can say, we can call conscious evolution. Once we are able to awaken from the lethargic sleep of our ignorance, we can conduct our own evolutionary journey through the attitudes and the choices that we make in life. The proposal of evolution, the proposal of mental or moral perfection, which humanity has, once this idea is accepted, is the complete responsibility of each one of us. In impressing, in carrying out the transformations necessary, as says Emmanuel, its spiritual author, from another medium, another spirit of Chico, the work or the task of spiritual renovation is personal and is intransferable. We have the means, if we force ourselves to acquire progress in the field of feeling and love, in the field of knowledge and wisdom, we are creating within ourselves the necessary resources to achieve our own happiness, to conquer and carry out our greatest dreams of perfection. In this way, taking as an analogy the way that a physical atom emits light, we observe here the electrical nucleus and their layers. We've seen that the change of signaling changes the form and changes the function. Every time that the electron needs to change layers, it has to be energized. Electrophysical, forces, electrical, physicals, electricity, temperature, or something else. And when it jumps to a more peripheral layer, it doesn't stay there very long because its own characteristic of chemical elements, it needs to return to its original position where it has minimal conformation and greatest performance of its function. As it was energized, as it goes back, it releases energy. It releases light in the form of electromagnetic waves. We have seen that mental matter and thought also are made up of atoms and mental electrons. And the observation that the atoms and the mental electrons that make up thought that serve as an object for our study to understand how the modification is processed, or the modification of our fields. Look, according to the mental state that we present, we're going to reach certain levels of atoms that in turn will determine a specific wave or characteristics determining repercussions in our spiritual field, which is also specific. Let's see. In the ordinary impressions of the human mind, that is, in these situations in which we accommodate ourselves to life, we are warm, we're not so hot, we're not so cold. We don't worry about doing good, but we also don't do bad, don't do evil. That is, we're accommodated to the situations of life. Our mind is going to excite the whole atom completely, the nucleus and the various layers of electrons. This produces waves that are very long, whose function is just a characteristic of maintaining individuality, and producing heat. The repercussion in our spiritual field is producing heat. This is what we perform to carry out the functions, the biochemical ones that are necessary for energy. But when we assume a thought of peaceful thought, a normal reflection, prayer, work to do good, when we propose to do something great in life, whether it's in the moral field or in the intellectual field, research or scientific research for good, the scientist is a worker with specific missions in the field of good. When he directs his research with that purpose, for example, when he does this, he's going to excite the mental electrons in those orbits, and therefore the waves are meant medium length, then makes the being have experience and produce interior light. And thus we're going to evolve every day, transforming our daily actions into experiences. And these experiences, in turn, are going to produce this interior light when we choose mental states that are noble, purposes that are specific and noble for the common good. Meantime, when the human being goes through the deepest pains of his soul, when we have the greatest difficulties and trials, or the greatest mental concentration, the hardest of our life, and even more, when we experience the more effective requests, our hearts mobilize forces that are deep, that come from the greatest intimacy of the being. Then we're going to excite the atomic nuclei of these mental electrons. We don't need to tell you the number of forces that exist in the atomic nucleus, because atomic bombs are proof. But once these atomic nuclei have been activated, the waves produced they're very short, and they're similar to gamma rays, with a tremendous ability to penetrate and ability to change the spiritual field in an immense way. This produces what? It's going to produce self-illumination and then radiation of that light. It's not by accident that artists have shown the images of the great saints of humanity, of those noble souls, as if they were covered with an luminous halo of their own light, because it's the light that each one brings out from himself as in accordance with his moral greatness in the area of fields and the feeling of love. The proposal of Jesus to humanity, it becomes really evident when he affirmed, "We are the light of the world," inviting each one of us to seek within ourselves to make this light shine. That your light shine, says Christ. The light of love, the light of wisdom, the light of immortality. We consider that the secrets of molecular biology, as we have been showing in a simple way, limited to our presentation, are a revelation of the divine planes of the greatest construction that God has yet made, which is life itself. We sincerely hope that this knowledge can serve for aggrandizing humanity and not for its destruction. We have a route to follow, the greatest code of moral love which humanity has received was proposed by Jesus. In the evidence of this code of moral life, we will make within ourselves the divine light shine, the light of love, I repeat, the light of immortality, the light of wisdom. A kiss for everybody.